Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Covington Joint Study Session with our great Planning Commission. In compliance with state law, City Council special and regular meetings are being held in a hybrid format with in-person, telephonic, and virtual options for public viewing and participation. With that, we'll call this meeting to order. And for roll call, let's just go around the table. We'll start with Joe and come around this way.
Joe Simomo, City Council.
Steve Bossum, Planning Commission.
Elizabeth Porter, City Council. Stephanie Hunziker, Planning Commission.
And Sean Smith, City Council.
Yep. Kenner Aronson.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll come last.
Christina Thomas, Council.
David Cottle, Planning Commission.
Jennifer Harja, Housing Council.
Kathy Hernandez, Associate Planner for the City. Selena Lyons, Community Development Director.
Regan Boley, City Manager.
Krista Bates, City Clerk.
And I'm Jeff Wagner, your mayor, and welcome everybody today. Thank you for being here. Today we have an item for discussion, and it's to discuss the comp plan, and I'm going to turn over Selena. But Selena, when you go through this, do you want questions as we go, or would you rather prefer questions at the end so you can get through this?
You know, I was going to ask you that question, Mayor. I think we could do questions as we go.
Okay.
I see two things happening. I think there's going to be questions potentially on like what we have in the slide, which is a high level. And then I am anticipating there might be more deeper questions based on the elements should that occur. So maybe we do presentation and then discussion.
Perfect.
Does that align?
Yep.
With what? Okay.
I just want to be able to make sure we get through it, but I know we're going to have quite a few questions. Well, I would anticipate.
I
quite a few
mean,
questions.
or not. That's success as well.
Considering how, considering that our community development worked on this and the planning commission is bringing it forward, I probably won't be any questions.
I am, right? We've got crazy.
Being thorough.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a short presentation, but I just want to just point out that Casey Bradfield from Burke is also on the line. She is our consultant at Burke. That's really assigned to us and is really the extension of our long range team. And she's going to also help along with the presentation. So the three of us are going to do this. Planning Commission is here also to answer questions. And as I get set up, I do have a quick question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I have a quick question. So your packet for this was like 1,000 pages, right? So I did a little, what famous novels are 1,000 pages?
Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Who said War and Peace?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings didn't make that. I just did the top 5.
Stephen King, The Stand.
Yes.
The original one, not the first one that came out.
Stephen King, The Dome.
No.
Oh.
So any last guesses? The last 3 was Les Miserables, The Count of Monte Cristo, and A Suitable Boy. Never heard of that one. But what they said about these 3 is that each of these novels is known for its expansive scope and depth, making them memorable reads that are often lengthy.
Oh,
Totally like.
that's what I was thinking. Well,
That is.
And this is the main reason I'm here tonight. The rest of the council, he can.
Okay, in all seriousness, let's get started here.
And welcome Casey and Debbie.
Let me share my screen.
Maximize the screen, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
All right, everyone can see that? Perfect.
I like that little misty tree.
Yeah, we have to thank our Arts Commission. They did all the branding for our plan. So yeah, they gave us, you know, and the Planning Commission can talk more about this later when we dive in more, but they gave us a lot of options and we just couldn't pick. And so we got a bunch of different cool options that we've been using on our marketing materials. And then we're going to use it obviously in the plan as well.
That's awesome.
Okay, so we're going to run through, we've got an hour and a half tonight. This is our goal tonight. We did introductions. We're going to do a quick background recap, talk through the focus areas, update on the external reviews, and then obviously open discussion for things outside of the presentation tonight. But if you've got presentations on here, I'm just gonna look to you, Mayor, to interrupt one of us if we're going and I miss them. Okay, so what is the comprehensive plan? I'll start by saying this is my 4th comprehensive plan that I've done as a planning agent of the state of Washington. These are documents for how cities decide to grow over the next 20 years. So these started in the 90s with the Growth Management Act. And really the purpose and intent of those were to say, cities, you're going to absorb growth, you're going to absorb jobs. How do you plan for that? How do you ensure that you've got the right infrastructure in place? How do you ensure you have the right capital planning in place? And can you accommodate that growth over time? And how do you plan to do that? So the comprehensive plan ultimately outlines goals and policies that direct that decision. And then every year we look at those. So it's a state mandate that every 10 years we look at these. So the last time we did this was in 2015. And at that time in 2015, we did a massive overhaul. I don't know if folks remember that, but I mean, it was big. We kind of threw out the old, we brought in the new. At that time, we had just done our downtown visioning. We had looked at road standards. We had exponential growth up until that point in the city. And so it was really time for us to kind of talk about where we fit in that regional area, in the regional area of King County and the state. And so for this update in 2024, we really just talked about it as leveling up, right? Because we didn't have to overhaul. We had caught up with ourselves. We maintained that catch up. And then really what we did in this one was focus on the areas that the state's vision maybe has changed or been modified. We updated our plan to align with those. And then also anything that the King County planning-wide policies required us to do. So we made sure that we were in alignment with those requirements. So I like to call it about leveling up. And at the end of the day, our comprehensive plan gets reviewed by a litany of agencies, but ultimately Puget Sound Regional Council certifies our plan, right? And why is that important? Why do we need a certified plan? Well, you don't need a certified plan, but that means you don't get to go get grants. They control the purses for the state of Washington for all infrastructure grants and monies that get allocated to all the cities or the cities within the Puget Sound area. So that's Kitsap County, Snohomish County, King County, and Pierce County. Okay. So if we don't have a certified plan, we don't get to play for that money. So it's really important, right? I don't want that to override the fact that it's just really important to do good planning, but I think that we do good planning in Covington. I think we've shown we've done good planning. So that is just really the importance of that. Now, some cities don't get certified by PSRC. They're still trying to get certified by PSRC from their 2015 plan, right? But there are also cities that don't necessarily have the infrastructure need or the dollar amount. So I just stress that because, you know, it's a big why for us. And then the implementing actions are what are also in the comp plan, and that's what sets our work plan for the next 20 years, okay? This is really quick. This is our adoption timeline. We have been working on this since 2022. We've got a series of steps upcoming to meet the December 2024 deadline. We've got our joint session tonight. We've got a public hearing with the Planning Commission next month. We have another session carved out for this group if we need it in November. And then we've got a December 10th date for council consideration. Our goal is to meet that 2024 deadline. I did talk to PSRC and I said, well, what if for some reason we end up in January? And he said, you would still be ahead of most cities in King County. There's a lot of cities that are lagging. That legislative session in 2023 really hurt a lot of cities' capability and capacity. So we are grateful to have Burke as a team member here. Along with this is we have to do other things adjacent. So one of those requirements is the STEP bill, which is basically the HB 1220 bill that's coming to you this month at the end, our next meeting. That has to be adopted in alignment with our comprehensive plan. So we have to submit those at the same time. And then during these other parts up there, you see that we're gonna work on addressing agency comments and then finalizing everything so the document looks nice. One thing that we just want to kind of start with is the guiding foundation. And for Covington, it's our vision, mission, and goals. And the council, you went through that exercise a few years ago, just as we were kicking this off. So those goals and that vision and those missions are embedded in what we've done. And you can see here, you know, what has changed since 2015. Like I said, we were just focusing on leveling up. There's a few things around equity that we were required to do that we should be doing. Our land capacity and housing have changed, our allocated numbers, and I'll talk about that. Transportation, those things are not mutually exclusive of each other. They work hand in hand. Economic development in downtown and Lake Point, those are fully embedded in our plan now, right? So those were things that we updated our plan in 2015. Now they're just part of our business model. And then natural areas in our capital facilities and funding. And what we've tried to do is align each of these elements of our comp plan, these items to our goals, right? So you can kind of see that on the slide here. Really focused on resiliency, vibrancy, health and safety, and providing a great community for all. Oh, I'm gonna go back to here really quick. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but this is another one of the taglines that the Arts Commission did, another one of their brands. And then we did a joint session with our Public Works Department, and we kind of peeled off another one, comprehensive planning to action. So that's something we can think about using forward when we talk about, hey, this idea was actually in your comp plan. This is something we've been working for, and now you're seeing it happen, right? So really starting to get that mindset connected. Couple high level slides. You may have seen these, you know, the last few years. King County is growing, the state is growing, the Puget Sound region is growing. And as part of that, we absorb our portion of growth. So we go through a process in 2019 called the Urban Growth Capacity, I can't remember, it's the buildable lands is what I always call it. But basically that decides what each city is going to take when we talk about divvying up the growth. So for Covington, when we went through that exercise, we requested about 43,010 new housing units and 4,496 jobs. And there's a huge calculation that goes into this, tons of spreadsheets, tons of information, lots of conversation at director levels, city manager levels. And basically you do a land capacity that shows you can accommodate that growth. Okay. And then the cities are broken down into different categories. There's your major cities, your RTA cities. So those are the cities that are part of the Regional Transportation Authority, Sound Transit. And then you have cities and towns, right? They used to divide us by large, medium, and small, but now they've divided us based on that RTA. So we're considered a city town. And that's important because all the legislative bills that come out, they tie back to those designations, right? Okay, I'm gonna pause there. Is there any questions on those first few slides? I'm gonna hand this over to Daphne.
Housing numbers, which includes, Lake Point in there, I guess, that's gonna be part of it.
Lake Point is fully embedded in our comprehensive plan. There is no, we don't need to justify them. We don't need to defend that. That is part of our housing growth. And yes, the short answer is yes.
So like 2,000 of those.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Getting back to the housing unit numbers, because I know that was something that we requested, and I'm not gonna dredge that all up again, but what I will ask is, we keep hearing, oh, well, we're pretty much built on capacity, or most of the buildable land is already spoken for, or is that, I mean, and I'm putting this up because like just 10 years ago, the number was lower, and now we're saying it's 4,310. Is it going to continue? There are people that are concerned about cutting more trees down or impeding on our wildlife and creating traffic. I mean, all of the things, right? So are we confident that in 10 more years, we're not going to come back and go, oh, no, we can do, where that number's going to change to 6,000 now. And then people are going to go, uncle.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
That's exactly what's going to happen.
we have to take our share as the state.
Every
grows
10
that.
years.
Right.
We reallocate
So
that
we
growth.
have to.
But we
increase
didn't
it.
have to take that number. We chose to take more than we were allocated.
Right. But then when it comes back, when we do that exercise
Right.
again, we'll have that conversation.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
now I don't want to get too in the weeds on this because we're
Yeah,
going to talk
that's
about
fair.
this later, but I also just want to put this into perspective. the growth targets that we are allocated, right? That is what this entire plan is based on. Okay, so the analogy I've used before is it's like your wedding invites. I'm expecting 43,000 people to come to my wedding. Some people might not RSVP, some people might bring more than one guest, but I'm prepared for that number, right? It's okay if that many people showed up, and I'm gonna have to scramble and find some extra plates if other people do, right? But that's why in this process, we do a 5-year check. So the 5-year check, things kind of shake out, and then we say we're on target. And I will tell you, if you look at the buildable lands data from the last time we did this, so the 2019, they adjust. So they say, this is what cities had, this is where cities landed in 2019. Everyone was over. We were like 200% over, right? Every city was over except for the major cities. Okay, it's really fascinating. I could do a whole like TED talk on that, but I'll save you that. But my whole point in bringing that up though, is that we will start that number process again in what'll that be, like 29, yeah, no, 2040, be 2040. And we will, no, sorry, 10 years from now. Oh my gosh, you guys, sorry. I'm already living in the future. So yeah, it'll be in 2030, 35 roughly. We'll do that process again. There'll be new projections. We don't know what that's gonna look like for us, right? And then those allocations will come out. But we also have to remember, there's bills that came before the legislation that now require, every lot is required to allow a minimum of 2 units, right? That kind of was baked into this because we knew it was coming, right? We have requirements now for, actually, I'm just gonna do this. And now we have requirements for our share of the income brackets, right? And part of that housing land capacity that we did that's in the back is that we looked at our centers, and while you might not go out, you might start going up, right? And what we haven't actualized in Covington today is the amount of redevelopment that could occur and the amount of vertical that could occur, okay? We've had historical subdivision land developments. Under these new laws, you can take those larger lots and potentially put 3 ADUs. You could put 2 townhomes in the back. That whole pattern is changing, and it will change by June of 2025, right? Will we see a flood of it? Maybe not, but there's a different story, I guess. Yeah. So yes, Beth, a very long answer to your short question is, yeah, we'll be doing this again.
Sure.
Is there a possibility when we look at this, when we say redevelopment, is there like, I'm gonna pick on Timber Lane because it's right there. Someone comes into one of the divisions of Timber Lane, it's a developer and says, I'm gonna buy all 45 of these homes, tear them down and build an apartment complex in Division 5 instead. Is that a possibility when we talk redevelopment as well?
On the big level, yes, when we talk redevelopment. Where Timber Lane is maybe not our best example is that they've got an HOA.
Yeah, I
Right.
was just using
But
that
yes,
as the
that's
example.
exactly what it is. And you know, like Covington Firs in our downtown plan is also a good example where it's kind of these older historic, single family, large lot, county tracts that we say, well, now you can do townhomes, you can do cottages, you can do all these different things. So someone could come in and buy 3 or 4 of those, and then suddenly what was 3 houses is now 9, right? Right? So
Units, not necessarily houses.
yeah, units,
But yeah,
townhomes,
yeah,
cottages, yeah, units, yeah.
Are you, gonna look for, I know you got a lot to go
Yeah.
through. I got some questions about how we, regulate different zones in going forward. What do you want Bill's comment?
Can we hold off
Yeah.
on those? Cause I think that they're gonna dovetail into housing, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's fine.
So I'm gonna maybe back and then jump forward. Actually, I think Daphne, I'm gonna have you do equity and then we'll jump into housing because it sounds like some questions.
Another kind of key item that the state and Vision 2050 really focuses on besides housing is equity. I know the commission and the council has done a lot of this work around equity as well as the Equity, Culture, and Social Justice Commission. But that's kind of one of the main focuses besides housing for this new comp plan update. As the commission and the Equity Commission and Planning Commission and City Council brought forward to this comp plan update is defining what equity is. So that was first important thing for this comp plan because each city was required to do an equity lens of how they're going to go through their comp plan and evaluate how it meets specific equity policies and goals. So the first stop for Covington was identifying what equity is. And then identifying what that equity lens would look like for Covington. The state didn't give us a precise way of doing an equity lens, so we created our own that would be, fitted for Covington. So that's something that we will be working with this comp plan update, not just within the Planning Commission aspect, but with the Covington overall, using this equity lens, and identifying the definition and working with your vision, mission, and goals. As part of that, we have the 5-year checkpoint, and that's how we're going to go back and measure if we're meeting some of those equity items. And as for this update, we made sure that some of the languages were kind of geared towards everyone. The slogan that the commission picked was Covington 2044, a thriving community for all. And they thought that would be best to encompass not just the Covington residents now, but also the Covington residents that are coming forward. So we want to include everyone, not just that is here, but include everyone that is hoping, those 4,000 community members that we're hoping to achieve. So I think this comp plan really focuses on how does Covington capture equity? And I think when we worked on that equity lens, we have specific questions and scenarios for each element of how we can meet those equity needs that the state is putting on us. Any questions?
Anything, Planning Commission? Also, Planning Commission, feel free to jump in too. I'm gonna jump here to land capacity and housing. So now we have these targets, and now we have to say, well, what's happening, right? And so we did what was called a housing needs assessment. That's in your appendix 1. So that's where we had talked about this, gosh, probably a year and a half ago now, about what the demographics of the city are, what we're seeing as far as cost burden, what we're seeing as far as affordability levels. And then we have to come up with goals and policies that are going to say we're going to meet those people where they are, and those that are coming in and those are here. And it's further required under HB 1220, which is the step code. So that's your transitional housing, your shelter housing, your emergency housing, and your permanent supportive housing. I'm sure I missed one in there. But you can't have barriers to these things, right? We no longer get to treat different housing differently, right? What we do for one, we do for all. So that was the big takeaway in HB 1220. And we'll talk more about that, next week, but we can talk more about it here if we need to. Middle housing, 1110, that was the big bill that basically changed or overrode what minimum densities basically were for cities, in the sense of the minimum of 2. There's also regulations in there about affordability levels. How do you build in affordability requirements into housing developments? And that's underway right now with the Planning Commission. They just had the gap analysis, I think, last meeting, and we're working through the amendments. And then the ADUs are also tacking on to that. The state law basically said you shall allow 3 ADUs, any size, any shape, any configuration on any lot. So that could be internal to your home, attached to your home, or detached, and you can have all 3. Okay. So we already allow ADUs in the city, but we don't allow them at the degree. So the beautiful thing with that one is that we don't have to go out and say, city, do you want ADUs? Like some of the major cities are doing right now. but now we have to refine it to align with that law. So the slide here you have is the Covington share of the state need growth targets. So this came out of the work of the King County Housing Group that basically said, well, now you have your 43,000 folks. Now, how are you going to meet AMI requirements, right? So that was another big calculation that came up. And this chart also ultimately represents those figures. So we already have met the 51 to 80 AMI group, and that's going to come up in some of the housing comments we received. Obviously highly deficient in that permanent supportive housing. That's the same across every city. And then the emergency housing also is a big item that a lot of cities are like, how do we address that? We were able to kind of negotiate a higher market rate areas because we had already achieved our 50 to AMI. So we were able to get market rate housing increases there. But ultimately in 5 years, we have to adopt all the legislation. We'll be audited against this, what's working, what's not. And then we may get additional feedback depending on how we're approaching that. And then just overall in our land capacity and housing, and Daphne talks about that, equity is embedded. So making sure that our requirements are inclusive, that we're not creating impacts and displacement issues as a result of it. That's a hard one to navigate. King County does have tools. They've asked us to look at those tools. Making sure that, you know, we're bringing folks into our communities. And again, that goes back to what we do for one, we do for all. And ultimately, we also have to protect our environment as part of that, right? We're critical areas. So that gets back to that density, that clustering, going vertical. All right, sorry. Before I move on from this slide. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Beth.
Do pallet homes count for emergency shelter?
To pallet?
Pallet homes,
Is this the one?
I don't know what that is. Should I know what that is?
you know, the little like pallet homes.
Oh, like tiny homes?
Yeah, but they're even
No.
smaller, right?
No, we don't.
I mean, it's for emergencies, so that if somebody's fleeing domestic violence or they're out on the street, they have a roof over their head and a safe.
I don't believe they do.
Okay.
Yeah, the
There-
state came out with specific definitions of what it's identified, and that's what we're going based on.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there, yep.
Go ahead, Sean.
And this, I'm happy to follow up with you on this, and this is not anything you probably haven't heard, but all of this is dependent upon builders building these houses.
Yeah.
We have absolutely no control over
Mhm.
whether we're gonna hit these or not, and it's so frustrating that we are being told we have to hit these or we won't get our funding. And if it's not profitable to builders, they're not gonna build it. And so I think we should put our money where our mouth is and start zoning some of these and saying, you're gonna build those houses there and let them find out. They're not gonna do it. And so we can go back to the legislature and say, look, what do you want us to do? We've actually zoned this new area, has to be 2 houses per unit, and no one's built. I fear that what we're gonna do is you're gonna get some people that are opportunistic. They go into older neighborhoods, they see these houses that they can get on the cheap. They build 16 new units in a neighborhood that people didn't want in the first place when they moved there. And it destroys the whole neighborhood, and the infrastructure is not capable of handling it. I mean, I know I'm screaming into the wind, but I really think we should call their bluff and say, we're gonna zone specific all new building has to have 2 units at least. If it's a new housing development, to get to what you're talking about, I'm hearing from people, the city's building too fast. And I know that's just part of the region, you know, it's just, you cannot accommodate an ever growing number of people. We just can't. I mean, eventually there's only so much water in this area.
The Planning
I mean,
Commission had many discussions
so,
on that very
I
topic.
just, you know,
How we can
and I
achieve-
appreciate that. And so eventually we have to say, we're not leaving it, the developers aren't gonna do it, and we're gonna be the ones holding the bag. So I'm just putting that out there. I think we have to eventually say, any new development in a new zone for housing has to be multiple units. And I think we'll get no one that will want to build those houses.
I'm gonna talk about that.
So can I circle back to that number though? Like what we're basically saying is we can do this, like, we're not the ones building it, so
Yeah.
we, yeah.
The
But
land, the
we
land's
will-
there.
We will allow it.
We have the
will
code to
support
allow.
it, we will code it, and that would be what would get us our funding, not if we hit the target, but if we are setting the stage for that to happen. I'm not, so.
I do want to come back to that, but I do want to give Commissioner Cottle, because or anyone on the commission, because they had a very similar conversation at the last.
Multiple times.
So I don't know if
Can we
anyone
have
wants to
good
speak to that.
Yeah, it's tough because what you're talking about there, correct me if I'm wrong, Selena, but setting aside specific zones to consolidate all of this new growth is also not allowed under these House bills. So they know that that'd be essentially gaming the densification rules because cities don't want to destroy old neighborhoods with it. So that would actually not be allowed under the new laws here. That said, a lot of the densification, it's builder based, right? So we just have to create the scenario for them to be able to come in. Whether or not the growth actually happens doesn't have to fall on the city. So kind of this. I do have one question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
For the 800 number on the far right, what percentage growth is that for emergency housing in Covington today?
It's not contained.
Emergency housing.
It's kind of, it floats out here
Yeah.
on its own. It's
Okay.
not part of that growth.
How many units do we have today?
Oh, we have 0.
0.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the more concerning thing to me, because that's 3% of the expected future population of Covington.
Mhm.
And in a world where 3% of your citizens are needing that type of service, I think you failed. So this is a massive area of growth in Covington relative to what exists today. And that has a huge potential to change the landscape.
Jennifer?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't permanent supportive housing and emergency housing most likely be more of a relationship with an organization versus sitting here and waiting for a builder to want to put it here?
Yes.
So can't the city, from a different angle, approach that need? Yeah, not different, but in parallel.
Yes, and I'll let Daphne jump in on this too, because between the two, so I sat on the state board for the housing, so I got invited there. So, and then Daphne represents us on Sokiho and our relationship with Skip. So, yeah, South King County Planning Group. Yeah. So anyway, so yes, but it's not perfected. So what I think Councilmember Porter said is that we do what we're told to do, right? And I would also maybe add just the conversation too, that the master builders are fully aware of all this, right? And so, you know, they also probably need to think about their business models if they want to be part of that solution, but that's a conversation for them. Something that we recognized as we were doing this is that because there is that really tight relationship with nonprofits or folks that are really like, this is what they do, right? This is their business model. They build this type of housing. They provide this type of housing, whether that's philanthropic through the religious organizations, you know, cares, you know, all those areas. What we were starting to recognize was like, oh yeah, we're going to get dinged for that. But you know what our council does? They give money every year to organizations that provide this housing. So last year, was it Regan? Yeah. So last year we lobbied for clarity, okay, that said, hey, if I don't hit that number, but we've given hundreds and thousands or millions of dollars to the regional solution, does that count for us? Now, the feedback was, yeah. And it's a footnote in PSRC's.
Yeah.
So it's still, I mean, Regan and I were just talking about this today, like it still kind of floats a little bit in the back of my head. Now, Commerce has said, we're not the ones judging you, right? That's King County. So for us, any contribution is a contribution at the state level. So I told Regan, let's keep our eyes on that because that is a big concern. But yes, anybody that's going to come in and with the regulations we're going to bring to you next meeting, that sets the pathway for them. That will allow them to come in.
And so I guess to further clarify, shouldn't we be doing these different avenues instead of just setting the pathway? Shouldn't we be reaching out to organizations in the interest of our residents that are projected to need this.
Well, that would be a decision, I'm gonna bring in decide, but that will be the decision of the council. We don't run a housing organization, right?
Which is why we would go after and try to build that relationship with someone else, because all of, this isn't just housing, this is bundled
Mhm.
services when we're talking about this type of. housing.
Right. Do you
So,
want-
so council's provided direction, as you know, to try to locate services here. So we've done a lot of work
Right.
with that. But as far as housing, we've not done that, although Catholic Community Services is, I think,
And Union Gospel Mission,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the one I was.
yeah, working on a women's shelter, right? But we've not gone out and recruited, for lack of a better word,
Right.
emergency shelter.
You know, speaking as an individual, I think it's something we should consider. This is very clear. And we need to do something about it and step outside of the box. And, you know, which you guys are very accustomed to doing with these vague requests, demands, asks that we get, but this is something that, you know, impacts.
Mhm.
So,
Well, it also has to be that those organizations want to come here. And in all of our regional meetings that we have, we ask for services and then trying to get them to come here. I think once we get a community center built, I think we'll start seeing a lot
And
more.
metro access. I'm not saying
That's-
Covington is at the top of the list, but
Yeah.
we need
Get
to
on it,
think
Joe.
that we need to think about it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly, Joe, get to work.
Okay. Any last questions on housing? I'm gonna try to go through these pretty quick.
Christina.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, my question is, when you talk about working in parallel, what does that look like? Do you want that to still come to Covington? Because that's not necessarily parallel, that's services in Covington. Or does that look like providing services in Burien, SeaTac, Renton?
Having something here in Covington for that 3%, right?
Thank you.
Or just to clarify, or combination of, right? What we do through SKIP and other
Right.
organizations, and then let's say if UGM builds a center here, facility and.
It's one of the reasons we didn't give our funds away to KCHA, King County Housing, but kept it and then put it in SKIP's bag, to do a lot more with truly.
All right,
I'll save my.
it's back to you, Selena, so we can get through these.
Oh, yeah, sorry. No, I mean, we've spent 2 years talking about, we're trying to do this in like 90 minutes. So the next key area of focus was transportation. You know, the biggest changes through here are just our travel demand. So we do what's called the travel demand model. We collect all this data, where are cars going, how are things moving about? And then we're measuring the impacts at our intersections based on kind of an A, B, C, D, and F. And I'll get to that in a second. So we basically just baselined that with this new plan. So we have our model is updated. We've got the travel counts, we've got signal timing knowledge. We plug in all that allocated growth. So I do want to say what's interesting about this is that when we plug in that growth, we're not just putting in the 43,000. Daphne goes through a map with thousands of little squares of the city, and we allocate. That's fully developed. That can maybe get 3 or 4 units. That can maybe get 15 units. And we break that down, and then that's what goes in there. So we can start to see the strain based on where the development happens in the city. Thank goodness we only do that every 10 years. So really what has changed? The biggest thing that comes out of this is what does our system need? So we've done a lot of capital work, and there's more capital work that we're gonna have to do to support that, right? So our TIP, our Transportation Improvement Program, has been pretty much the same the last 10 years. We're gonna expect that to change. Projects are falling off, new projects are gonna be coming on. One of the requirements under Vision 2050 is that we have to have a multimodal system. So we don't just get to do car tracking anymore. We look at our bus, our PEDs, our bikes, our cars, vehicles. We're doing a multimodal plan. That's something we're doing in tangent. So what's in this plan is kind of what we know today, and then we're going to be updating that later. So, and then our systems alignment. So what that really means is growth is happening. Where do you have deficiencies? can development occur with that deficiency? And how do we mitigate for that? And that's your transportation impact fees. That's also that's work that's going to be coming to you next year as well. And we have to have that implemented by 2025. And then we did climate work, which Casey will talk a little bit about later. And so what it came down to, this was our growth assumptions model. So you can't really see this, but based on putting in all of our growth, whether we mitigate or it's unmitigated, we only had 5 intersections that really kind of blew up. And those are at 240th and 180th, 240th, 196, Wax Road 180th, and 256 and 180th. Now you'll see here, there's still red on 272nd, but that's what's called an ultimate capacity road. We're never going to go more than 5 lanes. So whatever traffic gets absorbed into that, we live with, basically. But then the goal in a multimodal system is that you're offsetting that. Is there now a bus route? Is there other infrastructure that can be built into that? So this is what our plan looks like right now in 2024. These are all our projects. Some of those projects are going to fall off, like the 272nd, right? But we still got to build it out to Maple Valley, right? That's
Everyone keeps reminding
right,
us. of
right,
that.
yeah. I think we're going to see some other ones come onto this, things that we haven't really talked about much, like Southeast Wax Road, right? Covington Way. Some of the things at the northern end of the city. So there's more to come on that as we do impact fees. So I'm going to go over that really quick, but this is just a really quick snapshot of level of service. So while F always seems like the worst thing, I mean, it's forced flow is what we call it. So you're going to get lower speeds, your volumes are exceeding capacity, you're going to be in that stop and go traffic. So then, you know, we can't build our way out of it, basically. So you create additional pathways, additional modes. So like the Lake Point Boulevard opening up, that's going to alleviate some of that impact, but then that changes what we feel today on 272nd, right? That's going to change the outcome there. If we did a completion behind Home Depot, that would change the outcome on 272nd, right? Wax Road is another good example of that. So we'll get more into this when we talk about impact fees, but the big takeaway in this comp plan update was really just that we got aligned with where we needed to go and then created those goals and policies to set us up for our future capital program. Any questions on transportation? We can always come back to that one if it's meaty. I feel like this council's really embedded in transportation already. So, any questions? I'm gonna pause there. Okay. Economic development. So this economic development element was really completely done by CEDAS. Staff really did little. Burke facilitated interviews. We went back through and we validated what we had there. We hadn't looked at the economic development element since like 2012, right? So when we did the update, we just adopted what we had done in 2012. So it was really great. There's a ton of stakeholder outreach information that's in Appendix 5, and some of that actually led to the town center lawn, right? So that was a big takeaway early on that we heard from people that said, we don't even know where your town center is, right? So there's some cool stuff that's already coming out of that work. What CEDAS did was they validated our long-term plan. So our downtown plan is, they did a SWOT analysis on that. They looked at our strengths are retail and medical. That's really been our narrative. We want to continue that. They're seeing that movement, I think, with the new facility we're working towards. Something they talked more about was workforce housing. So is there like loft units, live work units? So those are things we're going to be presenting. Lake Point sub area, I mean, it is fully baked into our plan. So that is what it is. Oh, sorry, did I see a hand? Oh, okay, sorry. Local employment is really interesting. So in the document, there's some graphs, but I just want to point out too that, you know, people commute from Covington over 10 miles from the city. About 10,000 people leave, about 3,000 arrive, and 2,002 live work here. Now that 2,002 that live work here are not home occupations. Those don't get tracked. There's no way for us to really do that, right? But we know we have a lot of home occupations. So we know people are working in their homes, most likely. And the thing where this ties into our downtown and our built environment and our infrastructure and our transportation is that we have learned a lot of those traffic patterns have changed also because people are in a hybrid environment, right? So people can now do their grocery shopping during the day, they can go out to lunch. There's still a very strong desire for mixed use development, for what we call third places, right? Where can I go and hang out, have, spend time? And those are some of the things that came out in the post-pandemic opportunities, those lifestyle experiences. I think our rec department has done an incredible job with like finding ways to fill that gap until those facilities come. Now pause there.
You can go first.
I said I'm next.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are we trying to figure out what is going on with Amazon and some of these other corporations that are requiring their employees to go back to work in Seattle? And I mean, it's going to take away from our businesses here, and it's going to decrease potentially the quality of life for our residents. Is there any push or movement from cities or SAA to try to mediate that at all for our?
Like influence what private corporations are
Correct.
requiring?
I mean, I'm sure that they're probably being influenced by the city of Seattle. I mean, the other direction.
Maybe
even more so by their own employees.
Yeah.
But SCA and the city haven't done anything.
Okay. I didn't know if there was rumblings of trying to.
Any other thoughts, questions on economic development? The big takeaway from this is that we are on a course that, there's some little course corrections that we're going to be bringing back on our work plan and over the next few years. But for the most part, the vision is still remains. I'm going to let Casey take it from here.
Hey, Celine,
Oh,
I
yes,
do
sorry.
have one comment.
Oh,
on
yes.
this,
Go ahead.
or maybe a question for you. So if you go back to the guiding foundation slide, this is something that I'm curious how this happened. If you look at our housing units versus jobs number, 43, 40, is that 4496? That is relatively proportional. If you look at the region's growth, the number of people is vastly higher than the number of jobs expected. Why did Covington get saddled with a similar number of jobs and housing units when the region is far more people than jobs? Do you know why?
I don't know the exact reason why, and Casey might be able to speak to this, but my understanding of those allocations is that when we model that, we've got a lot of mixed use opportunity. We've got a lot of redevelopment opportunity in our downtown. And we wanted to make sure that like we're identifying that, right? Because one of Covington's goals was we want you to live, work, and play here, right? We want you to be here. So being striving to be a center for South King County. Now, I will say, I would love to make us a South King County center on the books with King County. They actually were asking me if I was vying for that this year. And I said, no, but don't turn your eye to us because it'd be super cool if that happened, but we're working on it.
Well, the reason I ask is, like, how many jobs exist in Covington today? What's that growth rate compared to population? Because I think if we're going to be in a similar situation as emergency housing, where 4,000 doesn't seem scary until you look at the growth rates per year, and I've got an assumption that housing is easier than jobs. Personally, I think there's a lot of levers for housing, but jobs are a different animal. So
No, and that's fair. I can't speak to the exact reason. Just basically looking at reports that I read in prep for this, but but it would take, we have got 2 big warehousing projects, right? Those guys, if they came in, they were estimating, 1,000 workers, like right there. So it feels, but you're right, the numbers do seem very similar, right? And then you're like, how does that really work out? Yeah. They don't track us so much on the jobs. Like there is no like penalty, you know what I mean? They're not on us for the jobs like they are for the units. And in fact, we're going to have to lower our jobs number to account for some of the feedback we heard on housing units. So yeah, and Casey will talk about a little bit about that later. All right. Okay, Casey, it's you.
Okay. And just to clarify, we're not planning to lower our growth target for jobs. We can't do that. It's more.
We've got capacity.
There we go.
Yeah, there's capacity.
Okay, so natural areas. There's a few places in the comprehensive plan that address natural areas. We've got a natural environment element that covers most natural environment issues, including air, water, critical areas, habitat areas, plants. And then we have a separate shoreline element that meets the requirements of the State Shoreline Act. We also have two key appendixes. There's the best available science appendix that helps make sure that Covington is using the latest science to inform its policies and code for how it protects the environment. We also in 2023 developed the climate vulnerability assessment, which we're going to use to develop a new climate element under current work that's ongoing with the city and that's due by 2029. Next slide. Capital facilities and utilities is also a key part of updating a comprehensive plan. The city has a combined element for both capital facilities and utilities. Under state law, there are a lot more rigorous requirements for the type of information you have to provide about capital facilities. For instance, you need to have an inventory of facilities, a forecast of future needs. You need to have a 6-year capital improvement plan that identifies projects as well as financing for those facilities. And then you need to have a policy in your comprehensive plan to reassess land use or other factors such as your level of service standards if you don't have enough money to build infrastructure to support growth. There are fewer information requirements about utilities. You need to provide general location and capacity and just communicate with providers to ensure that they're working with the city to provide for growth. So the element in the main body of the plan has a high-level summary of all that information, and then we have an additional appendix with a lot more detail. And this appendix, mostly we were pulling from existing plans that the city has and that its partners have, like the school district capital facilities plan and water system plans, and just compiling all that information in one piece. That appendix also looks at how the city finances its capital improvements. And we have another slide that has a sort of high-level summary of that.
Sorry, Casey, can I just speak to the last column really quick?
Sure.
One thing that I want to point out into is that there is a relationship to your facilities plan and your budget, okay? And so how I like to say it is not all budgetary items are required to be in the capital facilities plan. So when you read through that document, you're going to say, well, why aren't these things over here? You know, these other projects. Well, those projects aren't pertinent to our ability to meet our growth, right? They're things that we know we need, but they're not pertinent to. However, every capital item has to be incorporated into the plan. Every capital item must be incorporated into the plan to be in the budget, right? So it's kind of not a two-way street. And so these are things that when we're talking about capital improvement planning and the work that really Dawn's team does on infrastructure and Ethan's team on parks, we're working hand in hand to make sure that what's here is what's in your budget to ensure that that capital is shown. All right, Casey.
Thanks, Alina. So this slide has some of the information on financing for capital facilities that is in that capital facilities appendix. Some primary funding sources that the city has used over the past years to pay for facilities are grants, parks, property tax levy and impact fees, transportation impact fees, and benefit district revenues, other miscellaneous revenues such as developer payments, and transfers in from operating funds. We do also explore some other possible funding sources the city could look into if desired to raise additional funds for facilities, such as, for instance, considering going out for additional bonds or creating a special parks taxing district. And there's a discussion of those different funding sources in the appendix. Next slide.
Oh, can I point out one thing here too, Casey?
Sure.
When we're thinking about growth as well, so capital facilities is really how we're funding that growth over the next 20 years. And something that I think is really important to understand is that the requirement is not that the infrastructure is in place for that growth to happen. That infrastructure has to be reasonably assured or available for that to happen. So you could, let's say we have a roadway deficiency or something like that we know we've set on our tip, we're funding it, and we can show that within that 6 years, and in some cases it's 10 years, that infrastructure will be constructed, that development can move ahead regardless of that infrastructure in place, is the way the state law is written. So when we talk about that reasonable assurance, that's why it matters what we're putting and how we're showing this. And you can't reverse engineer it and say, well, we're going to take things out so that growth doesn't happen. But you have to be able to identify that you can accommodate that growth. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
When we tie in with that, then what, like, there has to be an assurance that we'd be able to get a grant, because we're running into that problem now, and we have been, right, where development goes in and we think that we're gonna be able to get money to improve a road, and it may not happen for 20 years, and so it isn't within 6 to 10, and it isn't anyone's like fault, like, I mean, but it's just that we're kind of left holding the bag and can't fund it.
That's true, but like 272nd is a good example of that, right? We haven't had money for that forever, but development still is occurring. Right? Because we're showing that in our capital facilities program that we have funding sources, we've identified additional potential funding sources, and we've made efforts to grow towards that. So it doesn't have to be like, it's $1 million, I'll have $1 million in 6 years, and so then they can go. We don't have that. It's, are you planning? That reasonable assurance is more, are you planning for that? So it's
yes,
yeah. Go ahead, Casey.
That's also a good segue to this slide. We took a look at the total costs of the projects in the city's 2024 budget and in your current transportation improvement plan, parks improvement plan, and stormwater improvement plan, and that total was 170 million. But a lot of those projects are flexible and can get built as development occurs. If you look in the middle column of this exhibit 42, there's a smaller total for projects that need to get built to meet concurrency standards or that are already budgeted and funded. And that total is just under 60 million, which matches up with dedicated revenues that we anticipate the city will have between 2024 and 2029. So in terms of the projects you really need to meet concurrency standards, it's looking like you have a slight surplus, but for additional projects that contribute to the city's quality of life and are more flexible, there's significant more funding that the city will need to go after over the coming years.
Or you can change your levels of service. Okay. So just in recap for the capital facilities plan, the biggest changes were obviously where we are budgetarily now, where we are in our infrastructure, where we are in our needs. But I also want to point out that, again, because we've stayed the course on a lot of these things, those items aren't that different from in 2015. They just haven't actualized yet, right? Like we've always had a new city hall or community center on that list. You know, we've had, certain road projects have continuously been on our list. So there really isn't like a lot of new stuff other than those few things we identified for transportation. So we're still actualizing our plan from 2015 moving forward. Any questions on capital? Okay, I'm going to hand this back over to, oh, sorry. Okay.
So tonight we're kind of just discussing the full draft of the comp plan. We're kind of at the end stages of this comp plan. It's been kind of a year's work with the Planning Commission and the public, and with the help of Burke. As we have published a full draft of the comp plan, we have also reached out to different agencies for their public review. as it's required for this comp plan update. We have issued SEPA, and have received really no comments besides the ones that were provided in your packet tonight. But something to point out is that, as Selena mentioned earlier, PSRC is the one that certifies our comment. And we have provided our draft, and we've met with PSRC, and they provided comment to us, which was an exhibit part of tonight's meeting, as well as King County Housing Committee. It is required through this process that King County reviews it to make sure it aligns with their CCPs. And then we also, another requirement is to meet with the Department of Commerce. They have a 60-day review that they review our whole draft and provide us comments. That is also provided in your packet tonight. We're in the midst of reviewing all the comments that we received, in addition to the Department of Natural Resources, Master Builders, and Department of Fish and Wildlife, and kind of reviewing what they've provided to us, and then kind of updating the comp plan. It is important to note that all the comments that we were provided were not substantial. There were just kind of minor edits that they wanted to do. Right now, we're working with Burke to kind of address, I guess, the bigger comments were through the Department of Commerce, but they were just kind of actualizing some of the placements of where we put some language. So it is required for us to do it, and we will be providing the Department of Commerce once the council provides an ordinance and passes it. They will be reviewing to make sure that those comments are met. So we are still working through all those comments. It might seem like we've received a lot, but we've met with all agencies, and they're not concerned with anything that was brought forward. Does anyone have questions on the comments that we received? I know this is the first time the Planning Commission also reviewed the comments. We were waiting till kind of the last meeting to kind of compile it, kind of push it forward for this month's meeting for Planning Commission.
So Daphne, thank you. So no surprises and nothing that was a big problem for you to overcome, right?
No, I would say the only thing that we received twice was kind of the information about ADUs, but we are kind of going back and reviewing that. But besides that, I would say no.
You want questions about anything else pertaining to it, or do you have more to bring forward?
That concludes our slideshow.
Okay.
So I'm open. We've got a little bit of time, and Mayor, if it suits us, we've got, what, 25 minutes or so, maybe less. If we need to extend a meeting into November, I'd love that direction tonight as well.
Okay, so we'll see how the comments go, and then if council wants to do that.
Okay.
All right. Does council have any other questions they want to bring up about the comp plan tonight? Debbie.
Thank you. So Selena knows that this was one of the things that I brought up after we did our review. As Joe and I, the boards that we sit on, we're probably hypersensitive to the lack of public transportation, but throughout almost all of the plan, we're reading that, we're going to have transportation available for all of this, but I'm not so sure that's going to happen because we don't have any say over it. So I'm finding that on skateboard, as much as I kind of hit the same ball over and over again and it goes nowhere, we just get a head nod that yes, we know it's a problem for Black Diamond, Maple Valley, and Covington. Is there any plan to address it? No. So do we get off the hook if we can't solve that problem? If we don't come up with a transportation plan that can meet the needs of this growing community, where does that leave us?
That's a great question. And we have internally had that conversation as well. And PSRC brought that up with us in our interview. So we had a 30-minute interview with them, which, Mayor, I hung up that and I didn't know it was the most beautiful meeting based on our comp plan. You know how we went to town last time? I was like,
Yeah.
That's it. This is it.
we're good? What? It was delightful. Anyway.
Is it a different team now that we're?
It's a different
you're-
team,
Okay.
different belief system on growth. But my point, I just sidebar that, but
No.
to getting back to the question, council member, is that is something we continuously say, and we brought that up with PSRC, who I would argue is probably responsible for aligning transportation programs across the region. And their response to us was, well, show your work, show where you're trying, show how you're making that happen, right? And
Show up at that meeting, we'll tell them.
I mean, but that might be where it is, right?
But I also think the plan that we're required to put together is different than what might happen on the ground in reality, right? So we have to put a plan together that shows we're moving towards that. Whether or not agencies come out here and provide public transport is up to them, not necessarily us on the ground. That makes sense.
I would just like to add that next time PSRC says, show your work, tell them to talk to King County Metro, who has no plans for new routes out here for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Joe. I mean, with you on that, I'm sure we'll see it sooner.
I've been fighting for 3 years and
But
I'm still. not
You're the
making
right
it.
person to do it, so.
But that's a good example, right? Because that's the agency that would provide public transportation
Right.
here. And so we have to plan as if it's coming, but whether it comes or not isn't up to us necessarily.
Yeah, it's a catch-22. I feel like there's a lot of these that we're experiencing with transportation, you know, and the experience in talking with the housing conversation, we weren't allowed to talk about the impacts on transportation, right? That was, you know, we don't want to hear any argument about transportation and housing. Okay, well. So at some point, we're either living with the change, right? Or there is a groundswell of demand, right? That needs to occur. So I think I loved your comment, and Dawn and Bob and I talk about this a lot of like, you know, I think Joe, you had shared with us about the students going to talk. Like that is, we might be in that kind of environment for a while.
So we'll just start keeping good records on
Right.
every time we approach this and what the answer or no answer is. Okay. All right, thank you. More no answer. Exactly.
Anybody else have any questions?
Sean, not that important, but at one point, you mentioned on one of the slides, you looked at each, I don't know if it was neighborhood or section, and said this area is fully developed, and this, you got 4 units here. What's the definition of fully developed? Because it seems like it's now, no area is fully developed. You put 50, yeah, you put 50 units on. So how do we decide what neighborhood's fully developed? And because some neighborhoods are gonna say they're fully developed. And so how do you define that?
Daphne, do you want to talk a little bit about that, or do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the process that I did in 2019 is basically, as Selena provided, is I went parcel by parcel with the help of Burke. And we put wetlands and our tree code and put it all kind of together to kind of show. And basically any land that was left outside any critical area or tree track or stormwater, anything like that was considered developable. And then that's kind of how we got some of our numbers.
Oh, so I understand that. There's some areas we can't build on, but in current neighborhoods, so are we saying there's some areas, some neighborhoods that could have additional units built in them? Or are we talking about unbuilt?
A little bit of both,
Okay.
right? So
I'd like to see those, maybe it was in, I missed it.
yeah,
I'd
it's
like to see those numbers and how we decided.
yeah, I was
which
just
neighborhoods
looking.
are built out and which ones aren't built out.
Yeah, well, it matters from the transportation perspective. In the buildable lands, it's a broader brush, right? So from the transportation, we are just trying to figure out where is that growth coming from, right? We kind of know Lake Point and downtown, but are we going to see an uptick on the east side? Are we going to see an uptick on the west side? That was for the transportation piece. For the buildable lands piece, it is a little bit of an art in how that's managed, because we also look at that redevelopment potential. And we also, for us in Covington, and this came out when we did our land capacity analysis, is we have what was like 70% of our current developments are in HOAs, right? So up until 2024, HOAs could say no ADUs, right? So we had to say, well, we have all these developments, all these homes that could potentially have a basement ADU or above garage ADU, but they're in an HOA. That's not gonna happen because the HOA is likely not gonna let them, right?
That's still the law? No, I thought
It's
the
a law now, so new, it's not retroactive to old HOAs, it's just
Oh.
any new developments coming in,
Oh.
yeah, yeah. And then you've got the on-street parking piece of that, right, where HOAs don't allow on-street parking, right? Well, if you start to put an ADU, you know, I mean, there's a waterfall of that, that's what we're doing here, that's not at the state level, so I can send out the buildable lands numbers if that's something the council would like to see, just as a refresher.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm
Yeah.
just curious how we define which areas are developed, which areas have capacity. And I guess if there's nothing else, we gotta be able to defend that, you know, it's something. Then.
I mean, right, well, I get what you're saying, because you know, you could have a neighborhood with 11 homes on it, but are those 11 homes on a 9,000 square foot lot?
Right.
Exactly.
And, you know, so we account
And
for
they
that,
say they're
right?
developed.
And they say they're developed, but under the way that we look at buildable lands, there's a redevelopment potential there. You could put another unit in the back because our lot sizes are only 2,500 square, right? So it's kind of unique. And this is the same argument that Redmond has been making for a long time, because they've got $1 million homes on these big lots. Like, no one's gonna come in and change those in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Why are you giving us so much capacity, right? But because the land is there,
Right.
they get a different number. Yeah. It's a valid argument. It really truly is.
In any of those conversations, that I know I've talked about this before, I think we've had some of these conversations about stormwater management and like, I mean, no, it's not like people are gonna come in and every square inch of grass is gonna end up getting paved over or built over, and then we have a storm problem. But we're seeing, you know, with climate change and things of this nature, there are roads streets that are more apt to flood now. I mean, even just at the corner in Timberlane, like where that person took away all the greenery and put gravel, and that's their right. It's not as bad as paving, but it is causing more of a flooding at that intersection. And so where is the limit of how much square acreage or square feet of permeable surface needs to be within a certain neighborhood or whatnot, depending on what else is going on around it? I mean, it's hard to say, well, we have a problem now because we have so many green spaces, but that may not happen in 10 years. Is there any conversation about, there really needs to be, half of your land has to be permeable, or what that looks like? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we talk about this a lot, because also parallel to this is the states looking at their state stormwater guidelines. So Ben and Daphne are working on that. That'll probably be coming up next year, right? Those requirements have not gotten easier. Those have actually gotten more restrictive, right? The laws came out with the housing bill that's like, you can't use a tree ordinance to circumvent or make it hard for this development to happen. So we're gonna probably have to look at that.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to, I will tell you, that's not something I'm excited about,
Yeah.
but- right?
Challenging tree ordinances all over.
Right,
you know,
right.
So. trees
So-
are not gonna-
Right? Trees aren't gonna prevent it. We've got the WUI, the wildlife, urban, I forget what it's called, but basically now the statewide fire law
Right.
codes,
Sure.
interface area, wildlife urban interface area, where the state's now remapping those, but right now the baseline is that you probably can't have trees within 10 feet of a home, right? So, I mean, that's a broad brush, broad statement. I don't know what it'll be for us specifically, but to what you are all pointing out, these are things that we talk about. The planning level is the layers, right? Right. So how do those all function together? And I think we've done the best we can in our plan to think about how that works for Covington and being mindful of that. And as I've told Regan, I've been very transparent about this. Like, we're going to do the responsible thing as community leaders. We're going to do the responsible thing as community builders. And we're going to apply what we need to do to make that happen. And I think when we do that 5-year check, we might be having other conversations, right? But I do see alignment in this room with our leaders and our planning commission and staff that we value all of that, right? So how do we navigate that interconnectedness? And I think the plan sets the tone for that. That's the goal. Where I think our jobs get a little harder is now creating the codes that make that clear, right? So all of it is highly concerning on how it's all gonna match together because it's gonna be change management at this point, right?
Christina.
If we're challenging tree ordinances, I mean, truly, is there anyone challenging wetland capacity and buffers? And in your calculation of our units, because King County is so involved in this, how are you assessing property without having an assessor come in prior and telling you this is wetland, this is not? Do you know what I mean? Do you?
Well, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Well, I was gonna say, we did go through a climate vulnerability assessment, and it does a pretty good job outlining the areas and showing exactly what we be identified as wetlands. But I still believe that with the potential climate impact, we're gonna be constantly revisiting that, because I think it's changing all the time.
Toward, in a good way or the opposite?
Depending if you're a
Depending on what-
builder or not.
Yeah, it depends
Yes.
on what you know. wetlands.
Right.
Well, I mean,
If I wanna be a resident, I wanna have
If
nature.
you're
around.
pro salamander.
of
or
course.
Yeah.
No, I understand, but but if you're pro trees and we're challenging the tree ordinance as well, and I'm not even talking about challenging wetlands, like, I
Right.
challenge the buffer, which just keeps increasing.
You're right.
I just want to.
Yeah,
On this.
no, it's a good headway to work that the planning commission is doing now. We
Right.
just did a gap analysis on the critical areas ordinance because that has to be adopted within 1 year of the comp plan.
Yeah.
So by December of 2025, we're coming back to you all with the critical areas ordinance. The commission just saw the gap analysis based on what we have today and versus where the state wants us to go. DOE is the responsible agency for that document. WDFW and DNR have their regulations they would like to see inside of that, which actually would increase buffers substantially.
And the
Substantially.
climate vulnerability assessment also turns around and gives us potential strategies for emergency management. What does that include? It includes emergency preparedness training we're supposed to provide to the community, evacuation plans with residents, enhance emergency preparedness for flooding, heat, wildfires, smoke, and develop a community resilience hub. Somewhere they go, if there's a disaster of some type, they're gonna go to that hub. We need to work on that.
They can go to the wetlands. There's no matter.
Yeah, there you
Correct me if I'm wrong, Selena, though, we don't have any capacity issues that would approach on our current wetlands guidance right now. Like, we've got enough capacity to handle this growth as is without having to approach on it.
That's correct. Based on our initial assumptions and buildup. I mean, we only know on the broad space, We don't know the individual properties because that's up to the property owners, but we kind of know, right? Where we've got 3 major streams that go through Covington. So we have FEMA floodways too. So those are easy, like right out of the gate, right? So shoreline, things like that. So yes, those were accounted for as a percentage of the total value of land.
Sean.
I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and so I come across and I'm like, but I really, it's almost an impossible task, you know.
Yeah,
And-
it is
and-
impossible.
And your kind of analogy of layers upon layers upon layers upon layers, and then at the bottom, there may not be, we may have a map that's totally blacked out, you know, I'm just starting to realize that. You know, when I got on the council, and even before I got on the planning commission, one of the things I realized is that our job is people want to move to Covington. Well, why is that? Because there's, you know, they find things that, you know, they're attracted to it. Not the least of it is, you know, affordable housing, good schools, you know, access to nature, those sorts of things. And we've got a tension between protecting those and accommodating more people coming in.
Exactly.
And establish this. Eventually, there is a carrying capacity, and, you know, I think we're starting to see there are icebergs in the future. That's what this plan is designed to do, is try and avoid those. And I don't want to say I fear, but we're identifying some that we don't have any control over. Things like infrastructure, transit, traffic, climate change. I'm just worried that we're going to destroy the very things that we are trying to protect, and make Covington great. And I don't know. I think that, you know, like, we obviously have to do what we have to do related to the law. But I think sometimes at some point in some of these venues, we need to be honest and say, we got to start looking at, if there's how many, would Covington be 100,000 people at some point? Is that the vision for this? I don't, where would we, I mean, basically everything you're saying with your wetlands, you're squeezing it, everyone's gonna go up. I mean, that's the only other place you can go. And do we want 100,000 people in Covington? Well, if we can keep all these other things, you know, that we're saying, then maybe, I don't know if we can. So I'd at least like in these venues to start having an honest conversation instead of saying, sure, you can have, you know, ice cream and we can lose weight. Well, let's just, you know, let's at least be honest.
Yeah.
You gotta make some choices.
Definitely.
Thank you for all your things.
I have a comment kind of piggybacking off of what he said. I kind of feel like we are waiting for the shoe to drop. I personally feel like it's time to hold on to our hats, especially in that 5-year check-in, probably at the 10-year. Look at what's happening in Florida. It's 105 degrees in Arizona right now. They have had 100 degrees or more since May. That's 6 months of 100+ degrees. We are going to be the climate haven
Exactly.
all across the northern parts of the country. And I feel like we're planning for not that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not factoring on all these things. And I agree that it's hard to swallow the pill of, you know, 4,400 units and lack of transportation. And I feel like in the next few years, they can't deny the transportation any longer because we're going to have that influx of people probably greater than the projections because it's just untenable in some of these areas. And hopefully we take the development of Florida into consideration and removing the buffers for absorption of water. And, you know, they're putting all these houses on the ocean. Hopefully we can learn from that as we're, you know, going through this process. But I'm concerned that we are still not prepared to that end, like what's truly going to happen in the next years. And like it or not, I don't feel like we're going to have a lot of say in some of these things.
So you mentioned, do we want to bring it back in November to have further discussions? Does council want to do that? Bring it back from where? Do we have?
With that, are there specifics, because she
Right.
covered it.
Yeah.
She covered everything, so.
Are there specific things you'd like us prepared to?
I want you to solve those.
Yeah.
So I think, well,
Especially the
Okay.
eating ice cream and losing.
I know, I was like, yes.
okay, just a minute. So if we don't bring it back, so you're having a public hearing with the planning commission in November. Then there's a public hearing with council at some time? No, it just comes back to council for
It'll come
final
back,
approval
yeah.
before the end of the year.
On December 10th. You can have a public hearing if you want.
No, not
Okay.
only if it's required.
No, not required, it's optional.
Okay, so then
So
you
then
will
we
get
would,
all of that information on December 10th. And that's when we just.
you would make
discuss
your
it,
decision,
Because
yes.
you've covered everything tonight. Okay,
Except for the
We'll
public
just
hearing.
complain.
well, the public hearing is with the
Planning commission.
planning commission. And then that information will be included in the packet
Right.
for us to discuss in December. As it usually is with public hearings.
This will be the
Okay,
third.
so those are the next steps.
Yeah, and that public hearing is our official public hearing, but we've done what, 3 or 4 outreach for
Yeah.
public input,
Open house.
open houses since
Yeah.
the beginning.
Okay.
Public hearings, I know.
Do you need anything else from us tonight?
So that I understand that's an affirmative to no
Correct.
in November. And that we will bring back the final for the council on the 10th.
Correct.
If there is any offline questions, feel free to send those over. Daphne and I are also available if you want to just sit and chat about the document in more depth.
Okay.
I don't know, can they?
So, well, we're running out of time.
Just,
Debbie?
so just quickly, then what we get on the tenth, then we'll be voting on it that night to approve, correct?
If you so choose, yes, it'll
Okay.
be ready for a vote.
And
Okay.
Is that as a consent or that would be a new business
It'll
item?
be a new business.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
All right.
And maybe if possible, if the council has anything, they're like, hey, I'd like this to be said or talked about in that, then let me know and I can arrange that for you.
Thank you all very much. Planning Commission, Community Development, thank you very much for all the work that you've done on this. I know it's been very tedious.
Yeah.
So thank you all for all your hard work and really appreciate what you've done.
Well,
And with that, this meeting is adjourned and we will move into our council meeting in 5 minutes.